Hello, and welcome to another episode of Solipsist Watched. I'm your host, the Social Solipsist, and this week I watched The Adventures of Robin Hood from 1938. So this is an interesting movie for a whole bunch of reasons. Not the least of which is it's arguably one of the most influential movies of all time, but in a lot of ways that are more subtle than I think most people will know or notice. It is fantastically out of place. Again, similar to a few older movies that I've talked about recently as well, being seemingly ahead of its time. And for what it is and when it was made, it's especially extraordinary. However, as a standalone product, I ultimately think that it's one of those things you watch and appreciate more than enjoy, I guess. It's not bad, but it is of an age and representative of a time and technological level and all these other things that it's just sort of outside. It's outside sort of the artistic norm as we tend to think of it in a like modern cinematic sense. This was filmed in 1938 in Technicolor, one of the early color film, color cinema technologies that actually got substantial use and wasn't more than sort of a tech demo. Technicolor has a whole history unto itself that I'm not going to dig into here, and I'm not an expert on either. But this being such a substantial production in terms of scale and money, as well as using this relatively new technology, it is and would have been at the time undeniably stunning to see projected in a movie theater. It's interesting because I watched this shortly after watching a different movie that I didn't bother to make a video about called Captain Blood. It's another Errol Flynn movie, one from a few years earlier, and it is in contrast stunning what a different kind of production it is. The history of like structuring movies in the like the post silent film era is very kind of interesting unto itself, because there are a lot of weird teething growing years where a lot of movies don't really seem to know how to structure themselves in a natural way, where they are structured more like an awkward stage play with intermissions and scene changes and things like that, rather than acknowledging or ignoring the shortcomings of a live theater production, and using the medium to its fullest in editing and composition and structure to deliver a more cohesive story. Captain Blood, I'm not going to talk about too much, but is a very it's in black and white, even though it's just a few years earlier. Production values, while impressive in some places, are horrible in others. The actual quality of the film stock itself, as it's been whatever version of restored or maintained, looks terrible by comparison. And while it was a much less successful film than this one, I think with a similar cast list, a number of the same actors who were relatively large names for their time, and only being a few years apart, I think the contrast is apt. Robin Hood looks like a film that could have been made 20, 30 years later. And while it definitely still has some of the like systemic growing pains of having scene transitions that don't quite work, and some other like sort of structural questionable choices. I would actually probably attribute more of that to the Robin Hood stories themselves and how they are traditionally presented, um, than than any particular production failure. The film looks pretty fantastic across the board. I am, again, as I've said before, not an expert in older films by any means. And so I don't know how this compares, strictly speaking, to a lot of other films that had just come out or would shortly come out. Obviously, there's a few like Gone with the Wind and a few others, Wizard of Oz, that are all within a few years here, that are color productions, and some of them have similarly big budgets. But it is really surprising to see some of the elements that are done in terms of the cinematography and camera work that's being done here. There are some really nice long shots. There are nice interior shots. There's stuff outside, stuff indoors, and they managed to do it all really nicely, including some camera movement that I didn't think was probably going to be present. Based on my limited knowledge of the camera technology at the time, the cameras were a lot less resilient, well, all the way up until the, like, really the 80s, basically. Cameras were pretty fragile, and especially for the time, and especially for this version of Technicolor, which actually meant recording on three or four strips of film at the same time simultaneously with a camera. Like seeing what looks like seeing these big panning shots and raised camera shots where they were on some sort of like boom, are really kind of stunning, but work really well to acknowledge the scale of the scene that they're in. Some of these are outdoor things where they really want to get a good shot of the size and scope of this event that is going on, or interior shots of the castle where they want to see. They want to show you the scale of the castle and that this is like 3 stories tall. It's this big, impressive room in a castle. It's not some half-assed set. And while there's a little bit of it that seems to be like, patting themselves on the back for what they've produced, I don't think any of it is unearned. The length of the shots is not so long that it seems like too self-congratulatory and unnecessary for the actual content of the film. It's really just setting a stage, and they do use the full size of the set, to good use in a lot of these things. Having both indoor shots that do a spatial establishment that is meaningful later, as well as outdoor sets where they're trying to give you a lay of the land and get you an idea of the ins and outs of a location so that you can acknowledge why that's meaningful later. Those are all used in ways that I don't think were very common to see at the time or in general. It's something that you can't really do with basic lockdown camera work and close interior shots that are trying to hide the fact that the set's too small for the scale that they're trying to do, something like that. In addition, with it being in Technicolor, there are a few technical hiccups here and there, artifacts of the film, and how it's processed and produced. But this film accidentally really is one of a couple that really set the stage for a lot of sort of cinematic choices that would come in the years and in decades that followed, in terms of designing for color. Everybody's outfits are spectacular. They're all supposed to be as colorful as possible. And people have different outfits throughout the film. There's one scene in particular where it's completely absurd that these characters surround around this table, and you'll know what scene I'm talking about probably if you've seen this before. There's an array of people around this table. They're all wearing cloaks, and all of the cloaks are all of these different incredibly vibrant colors for some reason. It's it's put in especially stark contrast with a scene later where those same characters are wearing cloaks that are not that colored. They are all different color, or they are all black, is what they are instead. And something tells me that at some point somebody said, "Oh, we should do these cloaks in color because even as goofy as it is, we'll do it for the like the slightly over the top cheesy hyper realism reason of we want to show off what this color film can do." And it's as silly as it is, the whole movie is tongue in cheek enough that I think it can get away with it. Like I was saying before, I think there's some structural issues, but more of that can be assigned to problems with the Robin Hood stories. If you've ever read somebody's version of Robin Hood, they are really a series of anecdotes. I mean, with the era that they came from and the way that they have or allegedly have been passed down, they're not exactly written for a structured novel's telling or a structured screenplay. It's really a series of anecdotes about things that Robin did and his merry men did, and the ways they finally, would finally achieve their goals. And so, as with many tellings of Robin Hood, I think this one sticks very close to some version of the source material. Again, the trying to track down who created Robin Hood and how is impossible, but it sticks to the originals as we know them in contemporary times pretty closely, and suffers a little in the structure as a result. However, the influence here is undeniable in terms of every subsequent version of Robin Hood, except for some of the more recent and terrible ones, taking some element of its telling, whether it's adaptations in shortening or in shortening the stories, or in terms of Robin's design himself, or how various characters are portrayed because of the actors that played them. Everybody knows that the classic Treasure Island movie adaptation is the reason why people talk like pirates the way they do. It's just because the actor whose name escapes me at the moment had that accent, and that's just what all pirates sound like from now on. This had less direct but similar effects on versions of Robin Hood and versions of various other evolutionary descendants in terms of its storytelling, or its cinematic storytelling. The To the point that like everything from the costume design, the cinematography, the even the music is very like a very early predecessor to a lot of things that would come later, including things like Star Wars. The swashbuckling. This is really a swashbuckler tale, despite its historical appearances. The parallels between this and pirate stories are very, very similar, and it is structured similarly as well, to tell this sort of it's sort of it's a character development in very obvious plain text, visual text that is, and the influences once you've seen this movie, I think, even if you've watched tons of movies before this one, I immediately see so many influences that it would later have in years or decades, or even coming up on a century now. it's hard not to have to acknowledge the actors, of course. In addition to all the other production things, the actors are fantastic. Errol Flynn is Errol Flynn. Really, the big three are Errol Flynn, Basil Rathbone, and Claude Rains, all of who are in really top form, chewing on the scenery, and riding that balance between cheesy and compelling. And as much as I said that I think the movie ultimately doesn't age super well in terms of being like an all-time classic piece of cinema, in terms of its influence and importance, and just things that can be learned from watching it from a like an academic, for want of a better phrase, standpoint, I think it's fantastic in that regard. So anyway, thank you guys for watching another episode of Solipsist Watched. I've been the Social Solipsist, and I'll see you guys next time.